I'm excited to introduce our next panel, being sold on your sales department. Michelle Crawford, co-founder and chief executive officer, Society Plus. Preston Tesvich, co-founder and SVP at Droplet.io. Joe Hamilton, CEO of Big C. And our moderator, Saru Seshadri, and CEO of Ultramatics. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a tough act to follow Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. Most of you don't know this. She was my personal champion and a big sponsor for Ultramatics inside IBM, and she was there. I've had the privilege of working with her for several years since she was VP of Marketing at IBM WebSphere. I've learned a lot of lessons from her. Thank you. So this topic is pretty interesting. When Karthik asked me to moderate this, I jumped on it. Sales is a big passion of mine. There's a saying that sales cures all illnesses. So our panel is pretty skilled in running several companies as well as with their latest incarnations. And so I'll allow them to introduce themselves first. Joe first.
Hey, my name is Joe Hamilton. Thanks to Ty for putting on this great event. I'm very happy to be here. I was here last year and it was fantastic, and it's shaping up well this year as well. One of my favorite words is value, and so a lot of what you'll hear me talk about is value, and that's revealing value, building value, understanding value, and value pricing. And most of the work I do in my own businesses and with other companies is based on the backbone of value that runs throughout the company and into the sales team.
Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Crawford. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Society Plus. We're an e-commerce brand. We make our own clothes and sell directly to consumers at great margins. And I have a background in product development and sales. My MBA from Florida State, worked at level 3 as director of product development, had $350 million worth of product under my purview, and one aspect of that was building our sales team. And so that was a B2B sales effort, and now as an entrepreneur, I'm in a B2C sales effort. So it's exciting to make that transition and share some of my insights with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Michelle. Preston?
Similar transition there. Preston Tesvich, co-founder of Droplet. We make IoT monetization platform and services that help consumer OEMs launch connected products and actually make it profitable. I got here from probably about a decade or so in direct sales experience, building sales teams in multiple territories in the Southwest for consumer products. So I went from B2C to B2B as well.
Great, thank you. So since the topic is so broad and deep, the panel spent a little bit of time with me yesterday and we prepped a little bit. So I have a few seed topics and questions, but as Sarah reminded in the last panel, if you have questions, go ahead and write them down on index cards and pass it around to me, and I'll be able to ask those questions on behalf of you as well. Both Jagdish and Sandy talked about product strategy and business model and those types of topics. Perhaps Joe, you can lead off with what types of things do you take into consideration when you're designing the product, and then aligning that with the sales organizations and how to build the sales organization itself.
Sure. So the product, to me, is, as you would expect, the value that it provides. And the first step in, once you've defined your value, then the first step is understanding how that value overlays with your target customer group. And once you've done that, once you figured out where the value plays with your customer group, it defines how you reveal that value to those customers. And that's where you make the decision on how to hire your sales team. So if you're revealing value in a way that informs, if you're revealing value in a way that inspires, if you're revealing value in a way that requires engagement, those are the types of sales teams you're going to want to build to satisfy those needs. And then where skill comes in is in the play in the value frame as far as how high, obviously you see value in your product at the highest level, and customers are going to appreciate that value, but have a price pressure to not pay as high of a price. And so where the sales skill comes in is getting them to move towards your higher vision of your value, and knowing how they're going to get there should determine how you hire your sales team.
Michelle, you have some interesting experiences in this product strategy as well, so especially with your new company, why don't you highlight some of that as well? So.
Sure. So for us, our product strategy, it was really an interesting journey. The demand for our product itself, our physical product, was very clear. I mean, we were being pulled into the marketplace, couldn't keep product on the shelf. And as we researched more and more, we realized that our product was more than just clothing, that our product was really a relationship that we build with our customers. That's really our product. And we monetize that product through the sale of clothing. And so our sales efforts are all focused on building those relationships with our customers. And that effort then informed our sales strategy by making relationships with the bloggers that our end users cared about, by making relationships with the women themselves. Our customers, we consider them our best friends, and we celebrate their birthdays and send them flowers, and so that's a big part of our sales effort. And then we also worked very closely with our content, and so our content is all about encouraging, empowering these women, and oh, by the way, everyone in those videos happens to be wearing our clothes. And so those kind of indirect, less transactional kind of sales strategies, we believe is really what has fueled our growth.
Excellent. Preston?
So for us, it was a journey of figuring out what to build first. Obviously, it's like how do you take a survey of the market, what's currently being provided, and how do you kind of find the in, right? How do you find the thing to build? And with our technology, it's kind of hard to do an MVP in a way because it's an infrastructure product. So it's if it's not done, it pretty much doesn't work, right? So there's like a significant investment to actually making something even testable in the market. So for us, it was kind of like a catapult, or how they say that planes always course correct when they're in flight, and that's kind of what we were doing, is building out our product as we were in dialogue with the market, as we were talking to customers and going to conferences and learning as much as we could to inform our product development. So that was essentially like how we built our product, and then we got to the point where it was how to package it, because once you have the technology built, there's all different kinds of ways you could talk about it, and as long as you're not changing the core technology, but you're changing the angle of approach and you're changing how you explain it, it can have pretty dramatic differences, especially in our field with the IoT, because it's so fragmented and everybody's trying to kind of find their way. So for us, it was the idea of figuring out what to build and then how to package it. So.
Terrific. So I think one of the key things that I learned through the process of talking to them as well, and Jagdish highlighted this morning when he pivoted NetScaler, and the market went down after 9/11. I found that Preston and Michelle and Joe as well have pivoted their solutions and products quite significantly and have to adapt sales strategies along with that. Joe or Preston, you can share your experience on that. So.
So we the biggest startup I've been involved in was a company called SavvyCard, and we started out in the Chamber of Commerce space and then pivoted into real estate. And that was driven by, pivoting can happen for good reasons and for bad reasons, and for us it happened because of bad reasons. We just weren't finding the revenue that we had hoped. And what we really, the takeaway was to understand why you're pivoting, and then using the data that you have in front of you. When you make your first decision where to go with your product, you don't have data, you have best guesses, and you don't have in-the-field experience. And when you get the product out there, and if it's not working as you'd expected or not going in the way you expected, and you decide to make a pivot, now you have the benefit of having some data because you've had the product out there. So the key is to not repeat the process that you used in deciding where to go in the first place, but to take the data that you have, and especially the feedback from your sales team, hugely important, because they're the people that are on the ground talking, and they will have the best user feedback for you, and to take that data and use that in your pivot.
I think pivoting is hard, right? Because I think one of the hardest things beyond the actual technology that needs to change and something that needs to be built, the hard thing in a lot of cases is giving up, core assumptions, right, if they're not really working once you actually test it in the market. So for us, I really like Paul Graham's explanation of this because in one of his blogs on Y Combinator, he talks about how when you're training for the Olympics, it's all about just fighting as hard as you can and banging your head against the wall, and just continuing to just move in the same direction. And he's like, startups aren't like that, right? It's like startups are like a science experiment where you basically have to follow where the evidence actually leads. And so that fluidity, I think, is tough when, you kind of have your baby product, right? And you want everybody else to love it, but sometimes it's just not going to work. So for us, we actually started as a smart home platform, a B2C platform, and that's actually when I came on was right when that product was being finished, and so right when we were going to market with it. And soon after starting this process, after talking to partners, we realized that, we really need to give up this assumption of the consumer space right now, and we need to move into this other thing where we feel like we can be better differentiated, right? And I think for us, pivoting in a lot of cases, it was, how can we be different, not just better, right? Because better doesn't really sell as much as different. So the decision came from essentially like talking to the market directly, talking to our investors, and then having the discipline to just go through with it. It was pretty painful, and it took a lot of time to re-engineer our product, but it turned out that was the right decision.
Michelle, you want to add anything?
Well, I actually started selling a different kind of women's clothes completely, and straight size clothes. And I had women come to me over and over again and say, I love what you're selling, but do you carry it in plus size? And I heard that enough times, and I decided I needed to go look into this. And there was such a clear disconnect between supply and demand. I mean, it was shocking. And so we made that pivot, and we changed the name of our company. We completely changed the business around. And within 2 months of proof of concept, it was very clear that was the right thing to do.
So excellent. So how do you then, while you're doing this pivoting and things like that, how do you do sales projections and sales management and then talking back to the investors and still inspiring confidence in them? Maybe you already raised cash, or you're about to raise cash. So what are some of the things that you've gone through in that process?
Well, I actually pivoted the business during my original proof of concept months for the original company. So at that point, I was still building my case that this was a great idea. And so I had not started talking to investors at that point, but I did pivot the business, went to proof of concept within about 2 months. And like I said, it was going great. I got, you might appreciate this, I had 4 investors ready to invest, ready to write the checks, and I met my business partner. And she is a force of nature within the fashion industry, plus size herself. And we talked through it, and I went back to our investors and I said, remember everything I told you? Well, I kind of don't want to do that anymore. Here's what I want to do, and here's why. And thank God they said that that's actually what kind of pushed them over the edge to sign those first checks.
Excellent. So Preston, you want to add anything?
That's actually exactly what happened with us. Like, in the original investor conversations, it was, well, how do you compete with Apple?
Right,
it's like,
right.
all right, well, that's over.
Yeah.
So the pivot for us was actually the reason we got investment, because it's like, oh, that sounds great. Do that.
Makes
Do
sense.
that instead. Yeah.
So essentially the sales projections and everything else you have to change and build the confidence back up, right? So
Yeah. When you're still figuring out what your product actually is, I mean, you're usually the salesperson, so you're usually the one figuring that out. And so there's not that much to change when you're that nimble. But,
Right.
If you've grown a whole team and you're trying to do it, I can imagine that's a lot harder to steer that ship.
I think it's a perfect segue to hiring a team. So coincidentally, when he and I were talking, we were talking about sales hiring and philosophies of sales hiring. And we connected on a few things that we had done as research in sales hiring. So how do you start your hiring process? Let's assume that you've done your pivoting and the projections are working okay and you're able to now start building the team. So where do you start?
Well, so we're there literally right now. So I guess for me, it comes down to culture. I loved Sandy's quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast is the quote that I've heard, but lunch is good too, I guess. And so that's I think the most important thing for me is finding someone who can fit into the culture. And right now, the culture of a smaller company, or at least for us, where we really need people in the trenches. I don't really look for the sort of coin-operated salesperson. I look for the zealot, the person that will be an evangelist, that will go to bat for the company, that won't bail at the first sign of a bigger offer, that's really committed to, building something. And that's a different philosophy, I think, in terms of, different stages of a company, because obviously when we get larger and we're, growing our sales organization, coin operated I think is fine then, but I think early on it's really important to get a nucleus of people that can really make your inner circle and have a really fantastic culture that as you add people in, they just kind of assimilate and assume that same culture and the same assumptions.
Can you also highlight the contrast between your previous job? I know you built a very large sales team in your previous job versus this one. So.
Yeah, well, the job that I did before building sales teams was with a really well-understood product that had been on the market for a long time. So it was essentially just, it really is that sort of Olympic model. You can bang your head against the wall in a direct sales model that has been around for a long time. And essentially the concept is if you take the right actions, the right results will happen. So that is like totally not true in a startup, right? Because you're still figuring out what the right action is. So you can take a lot of the wrong action and have nothing good happen. So conceptually, looking for different people, right? So looking for flexibility, fluidity, and someone who's not going to complain, even if it's 5 days straight of 18 hours.
Michelle, you have some unique experiences in this as well. So.
Yeah, so I went from a very traditional B2B sales model to selling to end users, having no money to do that. And what we decided to do was actually use our customers as our salespeople. And they did that, which is great, and continue to do that. It's one of the benefits of having a product they love. But we also, very early on, partnered up with influencers within the marketplace. So there is a tribe of fashion bloggers that focus on plus-size clothing. And they have devoted armies of followers. And we, because of our mission and who we are, and because of my business partner, who knows many of them personally, we were able to get them on board, and they actually sell for us. So they make videos about us, they talk about us, and they push people to buy us in their posts, and that's been fantastic. We also have our customer service people that are really, we say they're not really customer service people, they're like therapists. So, and they try to be, your best friend when you were 13, and they ask you about your cat, and all of those things create connections that help push this what we're really about, which is about confidence and living a strong, vibrant life. And by the way, you can do that by wearing our clothes. and that message resonates. We've recently started a wholesale effort that's been fantastic. And that wholesale effort is the traditional sales model, where we're hiring the traditional kind of salespeople. And it's the same thing. It's about zealots. I mean, when we go in and even sell at a wholesale level, they talk about the mission and who we are and how the clothes reflect that, and that's what sells the clothes.
Joe?
I think it's essential to identify what I would call the rarity factor in your sales needs. Every product has something, that's the hardest part about selling it. For me, I know coin operated is I think, when you're smaller, you need that family vibe, and as you get bigger, then I typically find that good sales acumen is typically the rarity factor. You can train for product, you can train for interaction, you can train for medium even, but every product is going to have something about it that's rare, and if you hire against that factor, then you have a commonality of skill in your sales team, and then that allows you to normalize how you train that sales team. So if everybody's an expert on the product, and that's the rarity factor, then training them is about maybe interpersonal relationships. And if everybody's good and you have really good relators, then it's about training them on product. So identifying the rarity factor, the thing that you need the most, that's the hardest to get, as your one common core, and then training against that would be my advice.
Excellent. Any tools and things like that that you guys have used, because it's kind of hard to pick and really find in one or two interviews whether these are the right people for you to hire, especially the first few hires, right? So any thoughts on that? So.
I used a tool called the Core Values Index for building my sales organization, and it's similar to the DISC, if people have heard of that. It's essentially corporate training, and it kind of gives you an idea of kind of what are the personality ingredients that are the strongest in this person. So I think trying to find some kind of way to quantify people in that way kind of helps you out in your communication, especially if you're interviewing a lot of different people. So if you have a large number, you have to find quick ways to kind of figure out how to communicate with them. So those commonalities are really helpful.
Especially if you have to move fast and
Yes.
get high velocity, right? So,
Yes.
excellent. Any questions, Sarah? So as it's coming, the next big topic that we all felt that from a sales perspective that you need to look at is how do you combine this whole world of digital marketing, which is a pretty overloaded term. And I wanted the panelists to talk about their experience. And in fact, Preston came up with this word, it's actually a journey, right? So maybe I can start with Michelle first and talk about your journey in digital marketing and integrating your sales efforts into the marketing efforts.
Sure. So every single person in our company works for sales. It doesn't matter what you do. And that has greatly affected all of our different channels. So we are we have multiple touch points with our customers, everywhere from awareness, where we're using the bloggers, like I told you about. We're working with some online marketplace kind of malls, and they're including all of our materials that are going out. We do paid advertising, of course. Facebook advertising has been excellent for us. If you don't know what you're doing, it goes off the rails real fast. So you have to really pay attention and make sure the people who are doing it really understand segmenting and understand that process. But certainly that's been excellent. And then I mentioned our customer service. So we know our customers that are coming through, and we have programs set up. If you're a recurring customer at different levels, we send notes, we send gifts. If you're a first-time customer, there's certain things that we do. We track all of this with repeat purchase rates, and then have more sales efforts that we implement to try to bump them up to the next level and things like that. So it is when you say omni-channel, it's definitely omni-channel.
Joe, you want to add?
Well, that's what we do every day. So we kind of see a cross-section of lots of different types of business. And I think at a basic level, the first decision to make is, are you an inbound or an outbound company? And the outbound companies, that's kind of interruption marketing, which is being on the television ads and magazine ads and things that kind of jump up at you when you're doing other things and trying to get your attention. And the pool of companies that does that is shrinking every day. That's your large consumer packaged goods companies or everyman services like cable. Most companies now are going to be inbound, which means putting out content and putting yourself out there in a way so that when people are looking for you, they find you, and then winning the battle against your competitors with superior content. So the second mistake, which, like I said, the bulk of companies tend to be inbound, and the next thing I see that people make mistakes on is not understanding that there is a buyer journey, that buyers go through stages. They assess first, then they consider, and then they decide. And you'll find that people put content out to service one of those levels without neglecting the other ones. And I think that same logic holds with your sales team as well. They need to understand where the buyer is on their journey, and obviously some products are quicker decisions and some are more involved decisions, but understanding that there is a journey that the buyer goes on as well, and adapting or being ready to meet them where they are in the journey, and then guide them to you the rest of the way. Excellent.
So, Preston, please add your experience to this.
that journey thing, I think, is the really important thing, is defining what that journey looks like for the customer. And for us, since the product was a variable for a while, and then the packaging was a variable for a while, now we're to okay, well, what's the journey to actually get someone from, awareness to actually closing them? And so when you have a kind of a long sales cycle product like us, I think a sales cycle like that versus maybe buying clothes is obviously totally different. So I think being really aware of defining how you want the customer's journey to be. For us, we realized that we were having a lot of great conversations with people, but they weren't converting, and realizing that and recognizing each step of the way, well, what are my milestone, chunks that I want people to go through, from awareness to sales. So content strategy and figuring out what to post out there to create this journey and knowing who to target. I think that's like extremely important, of course, and that's where we're at right now as a company. So.
Terrific. So I have some pretty interesting questions, so I'll start with a pretty funny one. Most salespeople can't sell very well. What's the number one tactic you use to separate the wheat from the chaff?
Results.
And before hiring itself, trying to do some things along those lines and not hire the wrong people, right? So, as well, back to some of the experience you had in the core value and things like that. So.
Yeah. As far as like factors to like totally be like, yeah, there's no way you're joining our team. I mean, I think integrity is probably the largest one there. If I don't feel like someone has integrity, that's the game ender for me. It's usually hard to necessarily gauge that immediately. So I think there's only so much you can get from one interview. So I think it's important to maybe have a few, depending on the type of sales role. If it's enterprise sales type of role, you're probably going to spend a lot of time with them before you hire them. So. I think getting to know them and figuring out those personality traits. I mean, aggressiveness and resourcefulness are huge, right? I need to be able to hand them a task, especially when the tasks aren't super clearly defined at this point. You need to be able to hand it to them and trust that they're going to have the wherewithal to, at the very least, figure out some of the steps of the process. Otherwise, they're just costing me more time.
Excellent. So one of the things that I can add to that is, having the right DNA is very important. So past performance doesn't necessarily mean they can adapt to your business model. In fact, there's been now a lot of articles coming out on high velocity sales and having the right DNA. Back to you, Michelle, on you're selling confidence, not clothing, right? So clothing experience necessarily is not enough, right? So, yeah. Right. So I don't know who can field this question. How many salespeople did you start with? For how long? When did you decide to add more salespeople and why? So who wants to field that question? So.
Well, in this company right now, I was the sole salesperson for up until maybe a few weeks ago. So the decision to hire another, and it was actually bringing him more in a much more substantial role, almost as a third co-founder, really. That decision was simply a bandwidth surface area, and we need another really smart person, on the team. As far as my other sales teams, I mean, it's always growing. The sales team is always recruiting, right? Always be recruiting when it comes to sales. As much as revenue solves all problems, sales solves all problems, recruiting is the answer, right? Because the recruiting is going to lead you to more sales. So I guess that relentless focus on always building your sales team is what I can't wait to do in our company once we figure out what path to send them down.
We maybe did things a little bit differently than some companies do. So I knew that we needed to go into plus size apparel. And actually the first thing I did was recruit the salespeople. I didn't even know what our product was going to be. So I went out to plus size fashion bloggers and I said, this is who we are, this is what we're about. I love who you are and what you're about. And I know you have a dream to bring great clothes that make women feel confident to your followers. I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose collections of clothes that you really like and think will resonate with your customers. I'll buy the clothes and then I'll give you a percentage of the profit. And so they were my first sales force. And based on what they chose as the product, we then tested and then kept more defining what our actual product was going to be. So I actually started with the sales force.
So, Joe, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with your clients as well on this question. So.
Well, yeah, and I would build off of what Michelle said. Is there are a lot of different, and they kind of lean on the fence between sales and marketing, but there are a lot of different ways to sell now. The traditional idea of hiring a person, there's affiliate networks out there. There are people, an army of people who do nothing but market and sell and drive traffic to their content. We mentioned influence marketers, people with YouTube channels and things like that. We have some products now that we put on YouTube, and we just send them a product, they do a video, and we get loads of leads coming in from that. So again, depending where you are, what kind of product you have, where you are with your budget, just be aware of the different ways to sell that are out there now that weren't there 5 years ago.
That's a good segue to the next question. So the question is, in the traditional B2B, in providing commoditized service, how do you gain access to the decision makers? Any best practices?
Relationships, and I think this goes back to content. I think that building your brand, I think your brand can smash through some of those walls, whether it be your personal brand or whether it be your company brand. But use your brand to smash through some of those walls to gain leverage, and then tenacity. That's where I think the old school way is just a very skilled salesperson that can work through there. But relationships.
I heard some Bollywood music. I think they want us to dance. So. Thank you, Joe. The other question, I think, from pivoting and making decisions early on, the context is failing fast. So, in the context of failing fast, how do you know your sales team or person is not working out?
Well, I think results.
Yeah.
Sure.
Your results, and also stop caring too.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a fantastic wholesale salesperson, traditional sales, and if she feels like something's not going well with the product or she's worried, she's over in product development and she is talking and she's looking through fabrics, or she's going to accounts, to the accounting department, saying, I don't understand this invoice. I'm not going to send it till I understand it. And that's somebody who cares, that's engaged, that's really going to make a difference. She's not going to let things slide and say, well, it's not my department. Or
Right. And the key is to also have the nimbleness with the sales team as well, as you learn, as you adapt and create new things, right? So on the B2B question, also to add to Joe, I have used some tactics of sending out valuable insight into the industry for the B2B executives that is more personalized and curated than just sending a book and things like that. So write white papers and other articles that you can distribute to them that gets you in the door sometimes. Do you use any software to assist you in following prospects and customers? I know we touched on this on digital marketing, but can you add to the customer acquisition tools and things like that?
Yeah, we use HubSpot. HubSpot is a good platform. I think there are a lot of good platforms out there. HubSpot is a bit expensive, but I think it offers good value. I would say, to me, I don't interact with the tools as much. So for me, what's most important is how you segment the customers within the tools, and having a really good intentional division of the names that go in there and how you need to address them going forward. So, what type of relationship you have, where they are in the buyer's journey, and that sort of thing would, to me, be more important than the actual tools you use, but we use HubSpot.
Michelle or Preston?
segmentation, same thing. The tool for us is less important than really understanding the different levels of our customer. And I remember when I went to undergrad years ago, they told us choose 3 to 5 target markets. And we have hundreds of profiles. We have African American women who are 50 to 65 who live in the Midwest. And we have creative for them, and we focus on them in our Facebook advertising. We have women who are 25 years old who just graduated from college, who live in the Southeast, and they like particular TV shows. And then so those kind of segmenting has enabled us to get 4x return on our ad spends in Facebook.
Excellent. So, Preston, you want to add anything?
We use a company called Pipedrive as our CRM. For us, it's, again, defining exactly what our funnel looks like is where we're at. So, the choice of tool I'm being flexible with, but that's what I currently use. There's another tool that's really neat if you need to build a list of leads. It's called Fuse Machines. It's a newer company. I think I actually even saw them on Beta List, which is like a website that lists all these new products that are coming out. And you can basically put in the segments that you're looking for, and it'll populate a list with email addresses. It actually just essentially uses AI and just figures out what their email address is. It's pretty fun. So that might be a good tool in the back pocket for anybody in here.
One common theme is that, back to Sandy's point, it's not the tool that makes a difference. I think being obsessed with your client and what is the consumer experience that you're going to give as you select your tools and as you select your implementation of those tools. I think that's what is most important, and create a unique consumer experience. I think that'll be very important more than any specific tool per se. Right? So excellent topics and sessions from the panel. A few takeaways. I think product strategy and pricing and working with it, and before you finally settle on what the actual working model should be, and then figuring out what your ultimate sales team looks like and aligning that with your product strategy is very important. And marketing and sales are not two different teams in your organization, and don't create a wall between them. As Michelle pointed out, it's a complete one integrated organizational approach for consumer experience that you need to have. When you're hiring sales teams, be careful on the culture and the type of DNA that the salesperson that you're bringing on board, because that's what makes or breaks the consumer experience as well. And in terms of marketing and integrating your tools and processes together, make sure that it is highly integrated into your consumer experience, and just don't implement tools for the sake of tools themselves. So any final thoughts and parting comments from the panelists?
I think sales is really hard. So you have to love what you do. And that is the most important thing for every person on our team, is we 1,000% believe in the mission. We love our customer, and we're committed to seeing it through. And that kind of dedication is what gets you through those kind of challenging spots.
Yeah, dovetailing with that, Simon Sinek has one of the best TED Talks about how to sell, where you have why, how, and what, and the uninspired marketer tries to just tell you what they're doing, whereas the really effective marketer is trying to get across why they're doing it, right? The sort of whys, and I think Michelle is a great example in her company, because she's not selling clothes, she's selling that feeling of acceptance and community, and then using clothes to basically push that idea. So that's the why, right? So if you can identify that, that's your recruiting tool, right? Like if you watch The Social Network, where they make, they essentially just parody the entire Silicon Valley culture, where it's like, we're revolutionizing cat photos on the internet, and that's, somehow they managed to make that exciting. But that's the idea, is figuring out the why and then using that to attract your earlier recruits and your customers and so on.
And I would say step outside of yourself. Don't worry about how many hours it took to make, how much the inputs cost, how much pressure you're under to pay back your capitalists, the people who backed your company. Quiet everything about what you're doing with the company and step into the mind of the customer and look back at yourself, and that's where you're going to have your best success in pricing and selling and driving the direction of the company.
Thank you so much. On behalf of TiECon, thank you, panelists. Thanks for your time. Thank you, TiECon, Karthik, Ramesh. Great job. So.